To order. This is a hearing of the Senate Commerce Committee, a full committee hearing. I am chairman of the subcommittee dealing with interstate commerce, trade, tourism, and sports. We will be joined by other colleagues, but I want to start on time because we have a series of votes that begin shortly after 12 o'clock today, and I do want to begin on time. I should say at the start that I'm a football fan. I watched Monday Night Football last evening. Football is a unbelievably popular sport, very interesting and wonderful sport in many ways. It is also big business. I call it sport. It is also big business with mostly wealthy owners and players that are paid a great deal of money. There are, I believe, 32 teams. They are able to work with and speak with each other because of an antitrust exemption. Those 32 teams, of course, do not include teams from North Dakota or Wyoming or states similar to that. We reserve these national pastimes for the large population centers, and many states do not participate personally in them by having professional sports teams, and that's certainly the case with my state. It is a sport, the sport of football, that causes and can cause substantial physical injury to many athletes. We have about 8,000 former players of this sport. There is and has been a controversy about disability issues, how former players have been treated. The retirees believe, that is, those who have formerly played this professional sport, believe that about 3 or 4% of the living retirees qualify for some type of disability benefit. The National Football League owners and the Players Association say that is much higher than the 3 or 4%. It seems to me that the Players Association represents active players and the Commissioner represents the owners. We have many who will testify here today who are former players in this sport, and I don't quite know who represents them, if anyone. In many cases, they are great athletes who ended their careers with real damage to their bodies. Some live in pain, and the question is, what happens to them? Who represents them? What role do they have with respect to this growing industry and the resources that this growing industry provides? It's a very large and a very profitable industry, and it seems to me an industry that ought to be able to take care of the needs of those who help build this wonderful sport. When we called this hearing, I did not know what to expect in terms of communications. I must tell you, I have received, as chairman of the subcommittee, and I'm chairing the full committee at the request of Senator Inouye, I must tell you I've received a lot of mail, a lot of letters from former football players, and was surprised by that and surprised by the message. I've had a chance to meet with people who feel strongly on both sides of the issue of the controversy over disability payments, and it seems to me a worthwhile subject for us to discuss. What has happened, how it has happened, what might be considered, and some would say, well, why is it any business of the United States Congress? Obviously, we have in the jurisdiction of this committee sports. I've been involved in sports issues with Senator McCain and others dealing with the subject of boxing. Boxing is a sport in which too many young boxers are used up by promoters and discarded and end up with nothing, and so we've attempted to create a National Boxing Commission. And with respect to football, there is an antitrust exemption that allows the teams to work together and to negotiate the various things together. So there is a reason for us to be interested and concerned, and that's the purpose of this hearing. Let me, before I begin, I want to mention that I'm going to call on Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who has asked to testify today, and we appreciate having her here. I'll take her testimony first. I don't expect we will ask questions, but we're happy to have her here, and then we will have two panels, and I will talk about the panels in a moment. But let me introduce Senator Hutchison for an opening comment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the opportunity to be at this hearing. I want to thank Chairman Inouye, as well as Vice Chairman Stevens, and of course Mr. Chairman Dorgan. And I think you have laid it out very well. We know that there are players before the era of the mega salaries, especially, who have had injuries that have manifested after the 5-year time period in which they have full coverage. And so we read about these things, and it does raise questions. And my hope is that with this hearing, we will hear some of the issues on both sides, and then hopefully the NFL will be able to work it out with a good, fair negotiation with the players and the former players, with everyone represented from their different perspectives, because I do think that perspectives are different depending on the era in which a player was able to play. And I also think that your reference to boxing is one that does provide somewhat of a model, because this is a high-risk sport. There's no question about it. And so we know that probably extra care on the medical side is something that is certainly warranted. However, I do hope that this can be settled in an amicable way and a responsible way by all the parties, and as we gather information, maybe that will be helpful, and as we monitor those negotiations. Let me just say on a personal note that one of my constituents is here, Daryl Johnston. I've known Daryl from a personal level because our children go to the same school. And so I have watched he and his wonderful wife, who are so active in the school and give back so much. So I've known him personally, but I know he also had to retire after 10 years with the Dallas Cowboys because of neck injuries, and has had a view on this that I think is worthy for us to hear. He is a person, Daryl Moose Johnston, who played for Syracuse. He was an All-American there, then earned his bachelor's degree in economics, and is a Fox Sports NFL broadcaster now, and has a great career. And I really am very pleased that he could become a part of the panel, and I thank the chairman for allowing that to happen. With that, I will listen to the testimony. I do have to leave a little earlier than the end of the hearing, so I will say that ahead of time, but look forward to having all of the testimony in writing. Thank you.
Senator, thank you very much. First, we will hear from Congressman Waters. Thank you very much for being with us. You may proceed.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Is the microphone turned on?
Can you hear me now? Yes. Good morning. I'd like to thank you, Chairman Dorgan, for holding this hearing, and I'd like to thank you, Senator Hutchinson, for being here this morning. And I'd like to thank all of the witnesses who have come today to help shed some light on many of the concerns that have been identified by former players. The National Football League's current system of compensation for its disabled retirees is an issue that has been widely discussed in Congress and the media. This issue also has great personal significance for me. My husband, Sidney Williams, played football in the NFL for 5 years. The NFL, we believe, has failed to fairly compensate its retired players for injuries suffered while playing a game that is one of the hallmarks of our American sporting tradition. These players chose professional football as a career, dedicated themselves to training and practice, and worked and played hard in a highly competitive contact sport. These players have given much to the NFL, and indeed have given their blood, sweat, and tears to the game of football. In return, the NFL owes much to its retired players that were injured as a result of competing in the game that Americans cherish. My purpose here today is to talk about a very specific case that I worked on for almost a year for a gentleman by the name of Jim Shorter. Mr. Shorter was a friend of my husband's and a former NFL player. Mr. Shorter died a horrible death, a death caused by years of neglect of football-related injuries. These injuries were compounded by the onset of adult diabetes and a lack of health care. When he died, Mr. Shorter had undergone several amputations, was blind, had had a heart attack, and was on dialysis. Furthermore, Jim Shorter died a broke man, stripped of his dignity and his silver years by an unfair and unyielding NFL disabilities program. This program, which is built like the rest of the functions of the NFL from the blood, sweat, and tears of men like Jim Shorter, was designed, in my belief, to refuse benefits for the very players that needed them most. At issue today are three components of the NFL benefit plan: pensions, disability benefits, and medical insurance. None of these adequately compensate the NFL's disabled players. Despite their hard work, injuries, and playing through those injuries, the average payout to retired professional football players is less than $2,000 a month. This is striking given that the poverty level in the United States is approximately $1,800 a month. Many retired football players receiving pensions have serious physical problems stemming from their playing days. Some have trouble walking, others have trouble sleeping, some have undergone multiple surgeries. In a few cases, former players have even committed suicide. One thing is clear: nearly all need more money than is provided by their pensions. Employer compensation to the NFL's pension plan paled in comparison to Major League Baseball. Total pension contributions left an average payout of $13,000 per football player and $36,700 per baseball player. To make the picture even clearer concerning the disproportionate pension system between football and baseball players, if former Washington cornerback Darrell Green, who played 20 years, decides to collect at age 55, he would get the largest pension in NFL history, $69,660 per year. A baseball player with a similar career, Cal Ripken Jr., stands to collect at 62 about $160,000. These numbers are astounding, given that football grosses considerably more revenue and income than baseball. The MLB's gross income is approximately $4.3 billion, while the NFL's gross is over $7.1 billion. Baseball continues to prosper on less income and higher expenses. There's no excuse for the NFL retirement benefits plan not to at least match the MLB's benefit plan. The risk of long-term injuries to which NFL players are exposed are legend. For example, there are growing concerns regarding the frequency of concussions among NFL players. In an aggressive contact sport, there are likely thousands of cases of concussions, many of which may result in subsequent disabilities. These retirees do not receive disability payments because they do not realize the impairments were caused by head injuries incurred years earlier. They are oftentimes too embarrassed to come forward, and the benefit system has been at least slow to recognize this phenomenon. Former safety Andre Waters, a 12-year veteran, recently committed suicide 44. A study of Waters' brain tissue revealed a succession of football-related concussions that left Waters with the brain tissue of an 85-year-old man. The physical nature of the NFL often leaves veterans unable to lead normal lives, and many rely on their pensions to survive. Reform of the disability benefit system is necessary to allow retirees to receive the compensation that they deserve and need for their disability. Under the NFL's current medical insurance plan, the league provides insurance to vested players for 5 years after retirement. However, the 5-year period fails to account for the many injuries that will not manifest serious health effects until the end of this period. Because football is an intense contact sport, football players face long-term physical ailments that other athletes are lucky enough to avoid. A 2003 University of North Carolina study found that 263 of the 2,500 retired NFL players said concussions may have had a permanent effect on their ability to think and remember as they got older. In 2005, just before the Super Bowl, the Pittsburgh Tribune Review produced an investigation on the number of injuries professional players suffer on the job. The investigation found that in the 2000 through 2003 seasons, NFL players racked up 6,558 injuries. More than half the athletes were hurt annually, with the numbers spiking at 68% in 2003 and 4. During typical 4-year careers, 1 of every 10 NFL receivers experiences a concussion. On average, 7 professional football players a week face potentially life-altering head, spine, or neck trauma. The effect of these players' injuries do not become apparent until many years into the future. Long-term medical insurance is needed to treat the professional football players' injuries. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, this issue is of personal concern to me. My husband, Sidney Williams, was an NFL player in the 1960s. During his 6 professional years, he served as linebacker on 1 championship team. Football is one of America's greatest sports. Our NFL football players give their all on the field and play hard for the glory of the game. The NFL should not forget the contributions of its former players and should provide them with an adequate system to address their retirement and disability benefits. Mr. Chairman, I have here a folder about Mr. Jim Shorter's case. I worked on the case for almost a year. It started in January of 1999 when he informed me that he had been trying to get the attention of the association and they had not returned his calls, they had not responded. I started writing letters to them and I wrote to everybody, including Mr. Talladoo, Mr. Upshaw, and finally they advised us what we needed to do, getting the health records. Not only did I get Mr. Shorter all of the examinations that he needed, I went back into records years past to get physical examination records in order to help present his case. I wrote letters to every member of the board at that time. It was...
Congressman Waters, I'm going to have to ask you to summarize. We have 10 witnesses
Thank
today.
you. Well, we wrote letters to the board. We reviewed the Burt-Bell plan. We discovered that Mr. Shorter had received early retirement after he left football, having made very little money. Of course, he took early retirement because he had no funds. But at that time, the plan said if you take early retirements, no matter what your disabilities are, you can never receive disability benefits. And so these are the records, and the committee are welcome to them. Some perhaps we can share with you at a later date. But I wanted to share with you today my personal knowledge about the inadequacies of the plan, and I thank you very much.
Congressman Waters, we will include, if you will provide us with information, we will include relevant information in the permanent committee record. We appreciate very much your coming over from the U.S. House today to provide testimony.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We have 2 panels today, and I want to mention the first panel, introduce members of the first panel. Daryl Johnson, who has been introduced by my colleague from Texas, Fox Sports announcer, former NFL player, Dallas Cowboys. Dave Dewerson, a player trustee for the NFL Player Retirement Plan and former NFL player for the Chicago Bears. Brent Boyd, former NFL player for the Minnesota Vikings. Bill Bain, former NFL player of the Los Angeles Rams, and Garrett Webster, the son of NFL player Mike Webster of the Pittsburgh Steelers. My understanding is that we have a number of other retirees in the room who've traveled to Washington for the hearing. I have the names of at least 4 of them. Let me mention them. If you are in the room, if you would just identify yourself. Conrad Dobler. Is Conrad Dobler here? Thank you. Dave Pear. Dwight Harrison. And Delvin Williams. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your attending the hearing. Let us begin with this panel, and let me call on you, Mr. Johnson, and let me say that the entire statement that you submit will be made a part of the permanent record. I would ask that each of you summarize your statements, if you would.
Thank you, Senator Dorgan. Welcome to all the distinguished guests. My name is Daryl Johnston. I played 11 years in the NFL for the Dallas Cowboys at the fullback position. My career was ended prematurely due to a neck injury I suffered in the opening game of the 1999 season. I know firsthand the frustration that many NFL players experience when going through the disability process. The initial doctor that filed my claim and the doctor who heard my appeal are designated as neutral physicians, but in reality are handpicked doctors by the NFL Players Association. The board that denied my claim is selected by NFL ownership and the NFL Players Association. Obviously, this is a system that is, by design, not interested in assisting the retired player. Going through this process, the frustration creates us to use such strong words as fraud, corruption, cronyism. And I don't think that the NFL Retirement Board understands that they're not only impacting the player, but the families of these players. Divorce is high. People are fighting for the custody of their children. I was very fortunate to play at a time when the NFL Players Association regained some of their bargaining power and used that in the 1993 collective bargaining agreement to implement some plans for current players, such as a severance package, a 401k, a second career savings plan, and 5 years in a COBRA health plan. But none of these programs benefit players before 1993. Players such as Mike Mosley, who played from 82 to 84, who received full disability for 6 years until a doctor hired by the NFL ruled sedentary work was possible, and without warning withdrew his payments in 2004. Mike now lives at home with his 75-year-old mother, his 14-year-old daughter, and they're asked to survive on his mother's $306 per month Social Security check. I also played in an era when player safety was emphasized. The artificial surfaces that we played on were much safer than those played on the generation previous to me. A gentleman such as Conrad Dobler, who spent his entire 10-year career playing on an experimental surface known as AstroTurf that has a direct link to the multiple knee and hip replacements he's had, a span of 1 year in which 7 surgeries were performed, and nearly 100 days in the hospital last year. He's been denied disability 12 times, even though he has been deemed to be 90% disabled. During my career, there was also raised awareness about the concussion issue that was going around the NFL. Stricter protocols were put into place about a player returning to the field of play, and actually a whistleblower policy was implemented to make sure that these protocols were upheld within organizations. This type of policy would have benefited Garrett Webster's father, Mike Webster, who, if not the best, one of the best centers to ever play in the NFL, upon retirement was impacted by dementia, was homeless, living out of his car, and never received a dime of disability from the NFL plan upon his death in 2002. The NFL Players Association is trying to make amends. In the most recent CBA, they did create a program, and they are implementing the 88 plan, named for Baltimore Colts tight end John Mackey. The 88 plan provides $88,000 a year for residential care facility or $54,000 a year for home care for players suffering from dementia, early onset Alzheimer's, as John Mackey himself is. However, this is administered as a reimbursement plan. Kay Morris, who is the wife of Bears linebacker Larry Morris, who played in the late 50s and early 60s, has yet to receive a disability payment off of the 88 plan, although she's already incurred $200,000 in medical expenses. The reason that we have the retirees in the situation that they're in right now is we have no voice and we have no bargaining power. And I would like to ask the Senate Oversight Committee to help us find our voice, to help us increase our bargaining power, so that we, the retirees, can do the same thing that the NFLPA did in the 1993 collective bargaining agreement for the current players. I also would like to request that this committee call on the General Accountability Office to conduct a study so all the data can be known by all the members that will be involved in negotiations as we move forward. The NFL, as has been mentioned, is a $7 billion a year industry. There is too much money here for this problem to exist. With the help of all the parties involved, Gene Upshaw, Roger Goodell, who will testify later, Dave Duerson, who sits to my left, the retired players who are in this room, we can fix this problem. The money is there to fix this problem. And there's no reason for our players to be in the situations that they're in. And with your help, I hope that we can take the first steps in creating a disability program that gives NFL retirees a voice and ensures that the players who founded this league are no longer forgotten. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Johnson, thank you very much. Next we'll hear from Mr. Dave Duerson, the player trustee for the NFL Player Retirement Plan and former NFL player for the Chicago Bears. Mr. Duerson.
Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been quite some time since I walked these halls, back as a summer intern in '82 for Senator Dick Lugar, so please say hello for me to him. But to you, Chairman, and members of the committee, I'm David R. Duerson, an 11-year retired NFL veteran. It is my privilege to serve as a trustee of the collectively bargained plans covering NFL players. I was born in Muncie, Indiana in 1960 to Julia and Arthur Duerson, Jr. My parents were married for 59 years until my mother's death of almost 4 years. My father is my hero. He has 2 Bronze Stars from World War II, having fought in the European theater, yet the medal he is most proud of is his Medal of Conduct. He also believes that every male child should serve 2 years in the armed services. My dad spent 38 years with General Motors and was an active member in the UAW. I stood alongside of him as a very small child on many picket lines, and I can still remember the day in 1974 that we became a 2-car and then a 3-car family. I asked my dad, what changed? And he said the GM had just given him the job in 1974 that he was qualified to do in 1945 upon returning from the war. My dad also told me that he was not raising any average kids. God, integrity, and education forms the foundation from which the Duerson name is built upon. I attended the University of Notre Dame on a football-baseball scholarship, graduating in May '83 with a BA in economics. I was a 4-year starter, 2-time All-American, captain, most valuable player, and was drafted by the Bears in '83 as the 64th player overall. I also graduated from McDonald's Hamburg University and Harvard Business School's owner, president's management program. Since retiring from the NFL, I've owned 3 McDonald's restaurants and 2 world-class meat processing companies. My first company ranked as high as the 44th largest African-American owned and operated business in the United States, with 2001 revenue in excess of $63 million. I had an extremely blessed NFL career, which included 4 consecutive Pro Bowls, 2 World Championships, 1987 NFL Man of the Year, and '88 NFL PA Humanitarian of the Year. My service to the NFLPA has been uninterrupted since the end of my rookie year, when I was voted assistant player representative, until today as a trustee. I represented both the Bears and the Giants as player rep, and the Arizona Cardinals as rep and as a member of the NFLPA Executive Committee. I was also a named plaintiff in the federal lawsuit which brought free agency to the NFL in 1993, along with Reggie White, Michael Buck, Hardy Nickerson, and Dan McElroy. I personally observed Gene Upshaw and his staff take our union from insolvency to an organization with a for-profit wing that generates millions of dollars for the players. I also watched him take us through decertification and recertification of the exact same union, the first time in the history of organized labor that occurred. It was Gene who coined the phrase, past, present, future. The focus has always been on honoring those players who played before us. I'm very proud of the role my teammates had in leading the strike. The union meeting to strike was held in Chicago. I will never forget the comment that our head coach, Mike Ditka, made when we returned to work. During the strike, the league brought in replacement players. Mike kept 4 of those replacement players, and he told all of us that those guys, the 4 scab players, are the real Bears. Mike's comments furthered my resolve, which ultimately led to my role as a plaintiff in U.S. District Court. Fighting for players' rights became a passion for me, and it's even stronger today. I was honored when I received an invitation upon retiring from the NFL to become alternate trustee of the players' plans, to serve alongside of Tom Condon, Jeff Van Note, and the late, great Lynn Tevis. Each man has operated with absolute integrity and with great resolve in carrying out their fiduciary responsibility. Our meetings with the NFL trustees have oftentimes been spirited and on occasion contentious, but always with both sides operating within ERISA guidelines. In all cases, federal law requires us to follow the terms of the plan, which states that if an individual is, quote, employable, he does not qualify for total and permanent disability. That is not an arbitrary decision being made on the part of the board. It is the law. 1993 was a pivotal year in regards to player salaries and benefits as a result of collective bargaining in Dallas, Texas, and a new collective bargaining agreement was agreed to. In that same meeting, the executive committee moved to create a pension benefit for the pre-59ers, those men who played prior to the creation of benefits. We got there with Mike Kent as president and an 11-membered executive committee, and a few strong player reps who wouldn't bend. Since 1993, with every negotiation and extension, the players have reached back to fund increases in past players' benefits. Can the process be improved? Absolutely. Can the process be sped up? It must be. But remember, we are bound by federal law and the terms of the plan. Can more be placed into the coffers for disability benefits? Again, absolutely. But those decisions are made by the current players, who, by the way, are putting 6% of their collectively negotiated package into total benefits. That's $82,000 per player per year. That comes directly from additional salary they would realize that's going into benefits, to the benefit of retired players. Gene and his staff have done yeoman's work on more than one occasion. I pay tribute to all of those players who over the years sacrificed time with family and oftentimes careers to join in this fight. I can personally recall numerous men who lost their jobs because of their union involvement. Today we are as close to labor peace as we've ever been, but the day is coming when the agreement will run out, and a system very much like pre-93 becomes a possibility again, with salaries being set and no free agency. I can uniquely relate to the players, both current and retired, as well as management, since I had as many as 252 employees. I paid their benefits out of my pocket, and I can also relate to the players who are feeling a significant financial crunch, as I lost my business in 2006 to receivership due to a cash flow challenge associated with a late startup after construction. I won a federal lawsuit in October 2004 for $34.592 million, but because the company is based in the Netherlands, I've been unable to secure any of the individual's assets as of yet, but I will. It has cost me my business and my home, and I'm exhausting assets as I speak. But God has been good. and he has been good to those men who take issue with where they find themselves today. This, Capitol Hill, is not the proper venue for this discussion of how do we improve disability benefits. I am a retired player, and every man playing today will very soon join our ranks. The place for this discussion is at the annual player rep meeting. Retired players need to be there 300 strong. It's there that the decisions are made, and it's there that our voice will be heard and influence felt. 8 men thoroughly immersed in the true unionized spirit are far greater assets than 80 with lukewarm enthusiasm. The game is better than it has ever been, and the players are compensated at unprecedented levels. I didn't realize the impact of it, but one of my sons might, or their children when they have them. I'm excited about what we've accomplished so far, and it's been a very fair life. I thank you. God bless you.
Mr. Durson, thank you very much. As you know, we have arranged the sounds of a carpenter as accompaniment for your testimony. We apologize for that, but see if we can stop it. Thank you for your statement. Mr. Bill Bain is a former NFL player for the Los Angeles Rams. Mr. Bain, you may proceed.
You're on. There you go. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, senators, and members of the committee. My name is Bill Bain. I am happy to be here in support of the NFLPA. I played 12 years in the NFL, most of them on running teams. It was my pleasure to spend 8 years with the LA Rams. I got to play with Hall of Famers Jack Youngblood, Jackie Slater, and Eric Dickerson. In 1983, Eric set the rookie record, which still stands after 24 years. In 1984, Eric set the NFL rushing record, which still stands after 23 years. I was very proud to be part of that LA Ram offensive line. As I stated before, I've been on running teams on most of my careers. The injuries I have received can best be described by an equation developed by a physicist that says 280-pound linemen hitting head-on 60 times a game is equivalent to 2 cars hitting head-on at 40 miles an hour. On running teams, you practice run blocking Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday. By doing so over 12 years, I developed a condition called venous insufficiency in both legs. That means that the veins have collapsed, making it difficult for blood to return back up to my heart. It just pulls into my feet and my legs. My legs, from my calf down, are the color of this tie. After retiring in 1987, I could not use my college degree to help my family because the employers that wanted to hire me were afraid that my medical conditions would increase the future medical insurance premiums beyond their acceptable levels. It was then that I was forced to take various physically demanding jobs to help my family out. This deteriorated my legs even further, causing ulcers, which would ooze and bleed and take 4 to 6 months to heal. An ulcer can best be described as a worm in an apple with stuff oozing out of it. In 1993, I received 2 letters from the NFL Players Benefits Office advising me of a financial condition of 2 funds that were negotiated by the NFLPA and the most recent CBA, which was negotiated after I had retired. I called the NFL office. My call was directed to Mickey Yaris Davis, and she's a godsend. Anyway, she explained to me what the 2 programs were. I got off the phone, explained what the 2 programs were to my wife. We both looked at each other and kind of laughed, and she said, "You can easily qualify for this." I called the NFLPA and requested a physical exam. A form was sent to me immediately. I had a doctor's appointment made. However, when I got to that doctor's appointment, unbeknownst to me, I needed to pay $300 up front for the exam. The doctor would not see me. Finally, on September 15, 1996, 2 years, 9 months after receiving the 2 letters, I was able to save up $300 to pay the upfront fee for the physical and take the examination. On January 16th, the retirement board met, and on January 18th, I received a letter of denial. The letter stated Dr. Schultz did not consider me permanently damaged goods. Between January 19th and March 15th, I started the appeal process. I collected letters from 2 workman's comp attorneys, 3 physicians, and 2 personal friends, all who know me well and had followed my career. One of the attorneys was Mike Bagby. Mike's a great friend. Sorry. Mike Bagby is a lawyer, and he has associates, and they specialize in workman's comp attorney law for the employer. and he's out of Santa Ana, California. Mike read Dr. Schultz's reports and asked me if I had a surgically repaired scar on my right knee. My answer was no, it's on my left knee. Then Mike asked me how come there was no reference to the venous insufficiency. And I answered Mike because he didn't ask me to take my socks off. I presented these letters to the board on April 24th, 1997. I had my appeal hearing. It ended at a 3-3 tie. And that's a good thing. It's 3 players and 3 owners. That was a good thing because with that decision as a tie, I get to go see a MAP doctor, MAP meaning medical advisory physician. On May 28, 1997, I was examined by Dr. DeBoni. Thank God I took my wife with me, who's an RN. During the exam, Dr. DeBoni stated, "You're kind of messed up, but not so badly that you should receive disability." That's when my wife said, and I said, she's an RN. That's when I said, "Bill, take down your socks." Well, Dr. DeBoni looked, the disease went like that, a look of complete astonishment. Dr. DeBoni examined my feet and my legs for the next 10 minutes, and it said, "Congratulations, you flunked your physical. This is a good thing." On July 23rd, the board granted my appeals for total and permanent disability benefits. On August 15th, 1997, the feast of the Assumption, I received my first check. During that tough, long-year process, I wanted to quit several times, but due to the support of the NFLPA and Mickey Yaris Davis, I did. In closing, I want to say that without the NFLPA's efforts, I'd be upside down. Without the federal Social Security disability benefits, I'd be inside out. Without my wife and her job and the medical benefits her job provides, I don't know where I would be, my 4 daughters would be, my whole family would be. I thank the NFLPA so very much for all their help because they stuck by me. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bain, thank you very much for being with us and sharing that story and your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Garrett Webster, the son of NFL player Mike Webster from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mr. Webster, you may proceed.
Thank you, Senator. Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin my testimony, I would just like to express my gratitude for being included in today's proceedings. I'm humbled to be here today in the capital of the greatest country in the world and to share the story of a great football player and a great man who was abandoned by the league he helped build. Today you will hear firsthand from former players about what it's like to try and obtain disabilities from the NFL. You will hear what it's like to be in constant pain. You will hear what it is like to fear the loss of your mind, body, and perhaps even your very soul while you are still relatively young. But that's not my story. I cannot tell you what it's like to wake up and not be able to walk to the shower without being in constant pain. I cannot tell you what it's like to feel the loss of your mind and then to feel it actually happening. I cannot tell you what it's like to become a stranger even to yourself. However, what I can tell you and what I will tell you is what it's like to stand by helpless as your father's life is turned into a constant living hell that most people would take their own lives to escape from. My father was Iron Mike Webster. He played 17 years and was perhaps the most widely respected player in the league during that time period. He was mainly respected for his work ethic and his devotion to his city and his team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was the Steeler the fans viewed as one of their own, a blue-collar man who would dedicate countless hours to help raising millions of dollars for spina bifida, who would stay long after autograph shows so everyone got their souvenirs signed, who greeted everyone with a handshake from those massive hands and made them feel like they were a personal friend. Ask all of these people who Mike Webster was, and they will tell you he is the definition of an all-time great. I am proud of my father, and as all sons are, I think my dad was the greatest dad in the world. When I was young, I remember my dad wrestling with my brother Colin and I in the pool, chasing robins with my sister Brooke and Hillary out in our front yard, and reading stories into a tape recorder so we could hear his voice while he was on long road trips. My mother, who could not be here today, remembers my dad as a good father and husband who could remember the street layouts of Chicago after taking one look at a map, and a man who would play practical jokes on the neighbors, not limited to putting a few rubber snakes in Mrs. Gregg's mailbox. But as I grew older and I grew more and more aware of my dad and his condition, I knew that the Mike Webster that I grew up and loved was dying. I remember the day that I knew something was wrong when, on my 10th birthday, my dad was nowhere to be found. I didn't even receive a phone call, which was not like him, because he would usually call me every single night before I went to sleep and call me his little buddy. Later that month, I found out why, when our family discovered Iron Mike Webster, bloated to over 300 pounds, shivering naked in a bed in a rat-infested motel, and at his side were not pictures of his kids, nor his Super Bowl rings, nor autographs, or any glory that you associate with football, but a bucket of human waste because he was too weak to make it to the bathroom. As time passed, my dad's condition only got worse. I have lived through things I would not wish on my worst enemy. Have any of you people around here had to shock your own father with a taser so he could go a few minutes without pain? Have any of you had to receive a phone call from your father telling him he was about to kill himself so he could get away from it all? Have any of you had to witness a once proud, strong man as Mike Webster have to beg for KFC and perhaps offer autographs just so he could eat something? Well, I have, and I cannot forget those experiences. My father is gone now. I cannot help him. But I can do what he would do for his teammates and fellow football players if he were here, healthy, and the man that he was before the repeated head injuries suffered on the football field took his mind and body from him at an early age, and took him from me far too soon. What I'm asking is that the NFL Players Union and the National Football League as a whole look beyond the bottom line and help the past, present, and future gladiators in every way that they can to find peace, self-respect, and a measure of health when their very short time in the game is over, and they don't end up relieving themselves in the oven as in a flash of dementia as my father once did. Believe me, there are millions of kids who play this beautiful game of football and have no idea of the risks. I'm calling on the league, the players union, the commissioner, the retired players, and the United States government to put aside egos and hurt feelings and work in a way to educate people about the health risks involved with playing the game, and to take care of those athletes who got hurt while playing it in a fair and balanced way, whether it be with health care, social workers, insurance, or whatever can be provided by a multi-billion-dollar corporation. A final plea I will make to you, Commissioner Roger Goodell. I personally think that you're a good man who wants to promote positive change in today's game. You have shown good leadership with things such as making sure the NFL players are accountable when they break the law, so they are good role models for kids today. I am making a plea to you, not as the son of Mike Webster, not as a 23-year-old kid who has lost his best friend and father, but as a young man who desperately wants no one to ever feel the pain that I feel every morning, to feel the loneliness that I feel when I have to turn to my father for advice and he is not there, to feel the heartbreak that I feel when I hear about Chris Benoit, Andre Waters, Reggie White, Justin Strelzik, and the web of people connected to them that have had brain injuries, and those brain injuries have destroyed their lives by repeated concussions and other head injuries. I ask you, Mr. Goodell, to use your position as NFL Commissioner to lead the charge to educate the public about brain injuries and show them how to rehab and take care of those injuries and take care of people that are slowly becoming a stranger to themselves and those around them. I pledge to offer whatever help I can and support. My father would like that, I know. I would give my life to never see another family end up like mine. I am ready to help. Please join me. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I thank you for your time.
Mr. Webster, thank you very much for being here today and for providing your testimony as well. Finally, we will hear from Brent Boyd, who's the former NFL player for the Minnesota Vikings. Mr. Boyd, you may proceed.
All right, thank you, Senator Dorgan and the committee, and especially your dedicated staff who's been so generous with their time and hard work leading into this hearing. Before my clock starts, as I was allowed in the House, I request a chance to explain my invisible disability because it affects my testimony. I do have brain damage. It's been located on brain scans. And the damaged part of the brain gets, when I'm under stress, gets less blood instead of more like normal people. And besides causing problems communicating, it causes excruciating pain. So, this is a Senate hearing. It's fairly stressful. And, the 5-minute clock is a little stressful. So I need to, I beg you to let me go slow and tell the story. There's a lot to tell. I'm going to need questions to tell. I can't get it all under 5 minutes. But thank you for accommodating my disability. And now to begin, I'm Brent Boyd. I'm a native Californian. I graduated with honors from UCLA and now resident of Reno, Nevada. My wife Gina is U.S. Postal mechanic, and son Anders, 19 years old, fireman in training. They couldn't make it with this trip. My neurologist doesn't allow me to travel alone, so I want to thank and acknowledge that I have been escorted by one of America's most decorated Vietnam heroes, retired Colonel Jack Kelly, United States Marine Corps, escorted me from the West Coast and around town. Although I just turned 50 this year, I'm already on medications for dementia and Alzheimer's. As is all too common for NFL players, the snowball of dementia has started rolling. So please grant me the opportunity to tell this whole story while I'm able. I have a lot to tell. The committee needs to hear a lot. So as long as we're here and we have this time together, let's take advantage of it, please. And exhaust me with questions. I'm fighting for my life. I'll stay here all day to answer questions. In addition to my own story, in the last week or two, just players who have found my email have written their own stories, and I haven't counted them. There's 150, 200 letters probably. I would like to submit this into the official record. Instead of a form letter where, faceless signatures are on it, each story here tells their own story of their disability and their journey through the rigged disability board. And each story is different and unique in its own way, but each has the common thread of the fraud and corruption of this disability process. May I submit this?
Without objection, we will include it in the permanent record, Mr. Boyd.
Also, I wrote the Boyd Plan, which is attached to my written testimony, and this was an answer to Chairwoman Sanchez's written follow-up question. But it's the only, to date, comprehensive solution to that. So I'm here to complain, but there's also a solution to the process of the plan. So I would like, just to let you know, I can answer questions not only anecdotally about myself, but about these other things. Now I got lost. There are, they keep changing the number of former players, but, approximately 8,000 former players in this most violent sport since the gladiators. We read Sunday only 4 qualified for concussion disability. They claim 317 disability recipients, which is a ridiculous number to begin with, but their 2006 tax filings show only 121 of the 8,000 former players are receiving any disability payments. The most disgusting number is this. They're taking $3.1 million out of our own pension fund to pay Doug L. and the Groom Law Firm to fight us with our own money and to alter and change the plan and turn it into a jungle of red tape. By contrast, baseball is paying their attorneys $170,000 to do the same job. Now, I love football. Everybody in this room loves football. I am aware that I'm putting a damper on this party. Everyone loves football. They would play this fantasy football. They don't want to hear about this ugly side, about all the carnage. It's like hearing Santa Claus beat up the reindeer. When a horse gets crippled, like Barbaro, you'd think Lincoln got shot again. When decades of NFL players are crippled and are denied benefits and left destitute by a rigged system, we are shoved into the shadows so the party can continue. I'm depending on your questioning to allow for details, but here's the story in short. It wasn't until 1999 that doctors correctly diagnosed my problems as being connected with concussions. Once they did that, I was sent for full 2-day neurological report. Brain scans show clear as day. It's on the brain scan. There's brain damage. It's on the picture. It's important because when they finally, doctor stopped and got to the third doctor who denied me, in his report he admits he never looked at any brain scan. Well, hearing this, friend and baseball agent Barry Axelrod helped me file my claim. When I called the NFL to alert them that I was filing my claim, I was told not to bother, and their quote was, the owners would never open that can of worms by approving a claim for head injury. The liability is so great, it's like tobacco companies fighting against the link between smoking and cancer. It's like automakers when they have faulty designs trying to deny any liability. This is a $7-8 million industry. I'm just a guy who has been off and on homeless, and I'm fighting, on a computer in my bedroom. but this is the truth of the situation. So you have the statement saying they will never open this can of worms. Shortly after that, my Viking medical files disappeared. I don't believe, it has to be. The NFL destroyed these files to remove the pesky contemporaneous notes that would prove my claim instantly, and then to allow the path Groom Law's experts at manipulating ERISA. I was sent to a doctor picked by the NFL as expected. This doctor was picked off a pre-approved list of physicians. I was living in San Diego at the time, single father with a young son. This neurologist enthusiastically supported my claim to the point of the NFL only asked him to examine me one day. He voluntarily brought me back a second day because at the end of the first day, he said, I suspect you have vertigo as a result of these concussions. I need another full day to confirm that. His test confirmed. I have vertigo from the NFL concussions. This report was sent to the NFL Disability Board. NFL Disability Board does not care. The NFL Disability Board ignores the basic tenet of ERISA. They only look for reasons to deny a claim. They never look for reasons to approve a claim. Importantly, well, after they ignored him, they sent me to a second doctor, this time a psychiatrist. First one was a neurologist. And second, the psychiatrist was even more enthusiastically in support of my claim. He sees NFL players often, and he says mine was the most profound that he had seen. And most importantly, these first two NFL doctors, there is a mandatory NFL form that they ask these doctors to fill out. The reason for this form is to remove any doubt as to causation, make sure there's no claims of ambivalence or equivocalization, if I said that right. First two doctors checked the boxes. I asked them if I was fully disabled, permanently disabled, yes, part of the body, brain. The question is on both of these, I'll just hold up one, is the disability a result of injury? Yes. Is the injury resulting from football-related activity? Yes. Both NFL, remember, they're NFL doctors, checked these claims, sent them to the Disability Board. Disability Board doesn't want to hear it because it's in support of a player. Now, again, this form proves causation and removes doubt about equivocating. The third doctor who would deny my claim has yet to this day to fill out this questionnaire. His name is Barry Gordon from Johns Hopkins. This third doctor never says in his report that they used to deny me. It's not found in his report that he ever says I am not disabled by the NFL. He does make a ridiculous statement that says concussions could not cause headaches, and anybody who believes that, raise your hand. Concussions don't cause depression, dizziness, and fatigue. My 4 symptoms he admits I have says they are impossible to link to concussions. To this day, despite what you're told in the misleading NFL white papers, we still have no idea what Dr. Gordon's answer is to the question whether my disability is football related. It was close enough for them to vote unanimously to deny my claim. Now again, I was a single dad, often homeless. I was kept alive by charity. To the disgrace of the National Football League was Major League Baseball, who kept me alive. Through Barry Axelrod, baseball players Mark Grace, Rick Sutcliffe, Jeff Bagwell, along with UCLA alums, actor Mark Harmon, Bill Walton, and others, formed a charity to move my son out of a campground or out of the cheap motel where we're living into an apartment near my son's school. And I need to thank the San Diego Native American Health Clinic, of which I don't qualify, but they provided emergency medical and dental care just out of the pity. So after a 9-month delay, which I was still reliant on charity, I was forced to leave my young son in San Diego and travel to Baltimore to see Barry Gordon. We fought this. There's plenty of doctors in Southern California. Doug L. said, you see Dr. Gordon, only Dr. Gordon, or you're denied. So I had no choice but to go. Importantly, those first 2 doctors were selected off that pre-approved list. Dr. Gordon was handpicked by Doug L. of Broom Law. Since I'd already seen a neurologist, they can't just send me to another neurologist and say they weren't happy with the first neurologist report. They need to have another excuse to go. So I was told I was being flown coast to coast, to take a complex, sophisticated neuropsychological exam. And before we get into that plan, it's important for you to know that after these first two doctor reports, the wording of the plan, the hang-up for Mr. L was, the plan says that I am to be awarded full disability if my disability is caused by or even relates to a head injury. No percentage of causation, just if it relates to a head injury. So again, incredibly, Dr. Gordon admits in his report he never bothered to look at existing brain scans, never ordered his own. He ruled on a body part he never looked at. As they teach in law school, don't ask if you don't want the answer. And now this neurological test that was all important to deciding my case, that they forced me to fly coast to coast, was not given by Dr. Gordon, as they've been telling me the whole time. This story gets more ridiculous as we go along, so hang with me. I show up to Baltimore, and this neurological test, which takes years to learn how to administer, is supposed to be only given by a PhD, especially if it's a case with legal ramifications. It takes years to understand the nuance. It's not just reading what was checked, on the paper. You got to understand the nuances of the person taking the test. It's supposed to be given by a neuropsychologist. They didn't bother hiring a neuropsychologist. There was a young linguistics student named Laura Atella who kept telling me over and over, it was a running joke. She had never seen the test till the day before. She took it home the night before and practiced on her boyfriend. This was the test that they flew me coast to coast. This was the test that was going to decide the fate of me and my son. They don't hire a neuropsychologist. They pull a linguistics student with no medical training off the street. She gives me the test. Her test was paired with Gordon's report, and Gordon's report, again, says concussions could not cause headaches. And again, I'm asking anybody to raise their hand who agrees with that. Now, this claim that for years, while the reports were in my favor, stretched for years, once they got this report, I was denied by the end of the week. It only took days. Now, after my Ninth Circuit case, too late for my case, I found a 1990 medical journal. It's fully documented by our same Barry Gordon, who said all of my symptoms, he admitted my symptoms, headaches, depression, dizziness, fatigue. Paid by the NFL, said you can't link those symptoms to concussions. Here's an article called Post-Concussion Syndrome, written by Barry Gordon and Johns Hopkins. Very first paragraph says, overall, headache, fatigue, and dizziness are the most common symptoms. And then to make it easier on this page 1, he creates a chart, table 1. Title of the chart is Symptoms of Post-Concussion Syndrome. All my symptoms are on this chart. The same symptoms when paid by Doug L., he wrote, you can't link to concussions. This is his own medical independent research for review by other neurologists, by his own peers. So this process took years, and to this day, my supposed advocates have never returned a call or email. That's why so many veterans are so angry. Upshaw's in the paper saying, why are they mad at me? Why are they mad at Tom Condon? This is why Lanny Davis is brought into the process. During these years, they kept getting it wrong. We get 90 days and we get a report. You try to call Gene Upshaw or Tom Condon or members of the disability board and say, hey, it's wrong. Fix it before the next meeting. They don't answer a call. To this day, they have never answered a call. They are our trusted advocates. We don't get to pick them. They're supposed to stand up and defend us. They don't return our calls. They are like dirty cops, sitting idly by in these meetings as doctor shopping and schemes for false denials are cooked up and executed right in front of them. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have a need for this hearing today if they would just stand up and do their job and advocate. We wouldn't be here today if not for the willing collusion of all sides. The commissioner, the previous commissioner at least, Upshaw, who both attend the meeting. There's 3 owners and 3 people appointed by Upshaw who are the 6 who actually vote. They all have to.
Mr. Boyd, I'm going to have to ask you to summarize. I have
okay. I know. I got you. That's why I asked. So, in review, I can speak for thousands of players. I can speak about solutions. I suffer both from the rigged system and the extra issue of concussions. The review, I was told they would never open a can of worms. My medical files disappeared. I was flown cross country for a sophisticated neuropsychological exam that was given by a young linguistics student. The doctor who denied me didn't bother to look at the brain scans. He wrote concussions could not cause headaches, but his independent medical research is totally contradictory to what he wrote when paid by the NFL. This is fraud, corruption, collusion. It's rampant in the NFL. I have over 150 letters from saying the same story. Thank you. Please exhaust me with questions, and sorry for going so long.
Mr. Boyd, thank you very much. Let me thank all the members of this panel. We have two panels today with 10 witnesses. I want to have the next panel begin testifying at after 11. That's 10 minutes from now. And I'm sorry we don't have unlimited time, but we will begin a series of votes on the floor of the Senate at 12:15. So let me make a couple of comments. First of all, the panel that we have heard from first is a panel that has very strong feelings about this issue. I think you contribute to a body of knowledge here and information that describes a problem. You know, I mean, and we're going to have a second panel in which some of that will be reacted to, some of it will be described again. But I've written a list of questions. What I'm going to want to do is submit some questions to you in writing if you're willing to respond to them. You raise a lot of important things. You know, Mr. Johnson, just very quickly, the concussion issues, it seems to me that's probably a very significant issue in this sport. Probably not very well described or not very well discussed in the early years of the sport. Do you think it's been addressed now for current players? It is obviously safer. They have more procedures. Is it addressed sufficiently for current players?
More so now than it was in the past. There's improvements in equipment. There's a lot of different things that have contributed to that, but the protocol for getting a player back onto the field, he has to pass a series of tests. They're forced sometimes with the severity of the concussion to miss the game the preceding week. So they are making some strides there, but back in the day, back when Mr. Boyd played, it was a badge of honor to go out on the field. You know, you joked with each other. You know, the light's not on and nobody's home. You know, the elevator doesn't go to the top. So we wore that as a badge of honor back at that time. It's changed, but it's an issue that is going to affect the players from the previous generation. Absolutely.
One of the overlying questions here is the Commissioner Goodell represents the owners. Mr. Upshaw represents current players for the Players Association. And the question is, and I will ask others about this in the next panel as well. The implication, I guess, is that the retired players don't have an advocate or are not represented, and I think Mr. Upshaw will say, well, we have bargained and made some substantial changes to try to improve things, but we will ask some questions about that. I've been joined by several colleagues, and before as I said, I'd like very much to call the second panel up at 11:15. We unfortunately don't have unlimited time this morning because of the votes that will occur in the Senate. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for putting this together. I wanted to welcome Mr. Boyd, who's a former Viking, and Mr. Boyd knows well that my father used to cover the Vikings and wrote several books, exactly, including True Hearts and Purple Heads, and Will the Vikings Ever Win the Super Bowl, and Will America Accept Love at Halftime? My favorite one. But I just wanted to thank you for sharing your difficult story today, and I think that all active players will one day be former players, and the average career, as you know, of NFL player is short, and I would hope that active players have a strong interest in the fair treatment of retired players. And I appreciated you coming, Mr. Boyd, and sharing your story with me as well as the other players. And I'm sure that everyone can agree that the NFL and the NFL Players Association would be best if they came to an agreement in a fair and appropriate way about how former players should be treated. And I would just have one quick question, Mr. Chairman, and that is of some of the retired players, and that is what were your understandings about your retirement when you were an active player? Did anyone ever explain to you how your retirement plan worked? What advice would you give now that you know what you went through, to active players about the consideration of their benefits as they go forward?
Real quickly, and they can answer too, but we understood there would be physical, orthopedic risk. And, I had all that, replaced knee and replaced hip coming next. And What they never explained to us was that concussions would have a mild concussion could destroy your life. That we thought we'd have a safety net. NFL players take incredible risks with their health and their life, and we thought at least there would be a safety net. But incredibly, they're paying millions of dollars. The process is there, the money's there. They're paying millions of dollars to get great attorneys to make sure we don't get those benefits.
If I understood the question in regards to what the players knew in terms of benefits and that information, that education process is quite thorough, and the players have a full understanding in regards to the choices they make, and even for those players who some years ago who played perhaps in the 60s and 70s, who took the early retirement benefits, signed documents that they in fact, yes, understood the penalties associated with taking early retirement and the ramifications of that. So from the standpoint of player reps on each team, those meetings, and as well as seminars that take place, were taking place certainly in the 80s when I played, and are most certainly taking place now. That education process is quite thorough. But for individual players, they have to make those decisions themselves. And also in regards to the issue of Alzheimer's, my father's 84, and as I had mentioned earlier, Senator, spent 30 years with General Motors. He also has Alzheimer's and brain damage, but never played a professional sport. So the challenge, in terms of where the damage comes from is a fair question, and one that that has been addressed, and is one that we in fact ask. But I would just say to Mr. Boyd that I've never received a phone call from him.
Well, he was new. He wasn't there during my process.
But various names were mentioned, and I was a trustee at that time as well. And I can tell you that for any player who's ever given me a call,
my wife. There's plenty of people. We got stacky letters who had called.
But just Mr. Duerson's statement that his father has Alzheimer's and he worked for GM at a plant, and that automatically excludes NFL players. Well, that's the reasoning. That's the line you're trying to connect.
No, I'm
not. But just let me finish. Can we let Mr. Johnson speak?
But you put words in my mouth.
Well, I'm not. But that's the process. That's how we understand the process to be. That we're looking for ways to deny claims, and we don't know. We don't know if it's 100% certainty that playing in the National Football League will cause you to have early onset Alzheimer's or dementia. We don't know that for 100%. But there is definite information that leads us that way, and trying to prevent one or two or three people going through this system and receiving benefits and tightening the purse strings down is turning your back and denying benefits to the other 98%, 99% of the people who rightfully qualify. That's the impression that we get as players. Is there's so much concern about opening Pandora's box and these funds being depleted that you're turning your back on everybody that rightfully deserves this disability payment.
Let me just say, we will not serve the interests of the inquiry of this hearing if we don't get the second panel up, because we've spent about an hour, nearly an hour on this panel. I'll call on Senator McCaskill and then Senator Kerry, and then I want to call the second panel up. Senator McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here. I heard you call Conrad Dobler's name, and I guess he's not here?
He's here.
Oh, hi, Conrad. I used to represent Conrad on some matters as a lawyer in Kansas City, and I certainly was a big fan of your dad's, Mr. Webster, as a chief season ticket holder for a number of years. I really was going to please you, Mr. Chairman, because my questions really are probably more appropriate for the second panel, because what I want to talk about is financial transparency. I want to talk about the fact that the Disability Fund and Pension Fund has $1 billion in assets, and the fact that the retired players don't have a good sense of exactly how that's earning money, exactly how it's being paid out, whether or not it is financially viable in terms of being more generous in terms of disability determinations and taking care of the players that have taken care of fans for as long as the game has been in existence.
And so I'll withhold my questions, and hopefully I'll be here by the time it's time to do that. If not, I'll make sure they get answered for the record. But thank you all for being here, and we will do our best to see if we can alleviate some of the pain and suffering that is ongoing with retired NFL players.
Thank you.
Senator McCaskill, thank you very much. Senator Kerry.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I apologize for being late. Just very quickly, because we do want to hear from the second panel. Obviously, America loves this game. It's important to our national fabric. And it's a great game. And people respect those of you who played it, and particularly those retired players who've built what we have today, this extraordinary franchise. Something like 67,000 spectators per game across the country. It's the highest watched domestic sport, professional sport in the nation. The revenues are extraordinary, $6 billion annually. You have this fund of $1.1 billion, and I think most Americans would look at this today and say, wow, what is the Congress doing getting into this, and why do they have to, and what's going on in this relationship? It seems to me that a league as wealthy and as successful as the National Football League, built on the contribution of a bunch of gifted athletes who, two-thirds of them have suffered an injury that required either surgery or an 8-game absence, 50% of whom retire because of an injury, 60% of whom have had a concussion, a quarter of whom have had multiple concussions. It seems to me the league itself is dropping the ball here, no pun intended, in terms of just its relationship with these people. What do you do in the face of that kind of wealth, that kind of money being made by people who never touched the field except to walk on it, congratulate the guys who played, and people are struggling with the after effects in the way that they are? There isn't any physician in the country or any person who's a weekend athlete who doesn't understand what happens to the body as it gets older and what happens to you as a consequence of early injuries of any kind. So my hope is the league will get its act together here. That's really what's needed. Better communication, a standardized sort of understanding of the process, and frankly, a presumption in favor of those who went out on the field and put themselves at risk in the way that they do on a weekly basis. So I hope we don't have to do something. Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you are. I am prepared, if the league doesn't do that, to introduce, which I would hope we wouldn't ever have to do, legislation to create some kind of appropriate accountability and oversight. I hope that it never comes to that.
Senator Kerry, thank you very much. Senator Thune, we have just finished with the first panel and are about to call up the second panel. Would you want to be recognized now, or would you like to wait till the...
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy. I've got an opening statement I'll include for the record. I want to thank you for holding the hearing and appreciate those who've come today to share their stories, to testify.
Thank you very much. Let me just say, as we release this panel, we will be submitting some questions to you. Mr. Bain, Mr. Boyd, for example, your testimony, I understand the passion and the emotion. This is not a debate about some idea. This is about your lives. And so I understand that, and I very much appreciate your willingness, Mr. Webster, your willingness to come. Mr. Dewerson, thank you for being here, and Mr. Johnson as well, to come and be a part of this discussion. It's a very important discussion. And so we will be submitting some questions to you, but many of you have come great distance to present testimony, and we are very grateful for that. Thank you very, very much.
Mr. McCaskill, if I can add one stat that'll be important before you get the second, and it's only 5 seconds. 1994 OSHA study, the life expectancy for NFL players, for total players, is 55 years. For the big linemen like us, is 52 years. And that's our slogan, is what they're doing: delay, deny, hope we die. They have incentive to drag their feet and hope that nature takes its course and solves this problem. And the second point is they say, well, if you work for IBM, when you're 50, they don't take care of it. But if you walk in a room with 50, 60-year-old IBM veterans, most of them aren't crippled and half of them don't have dementia. So I just wanted to let you know that OSHA study is very important for you to know.
Let me thank this panel. We will excuse the panel and ask for the second panel to please come forward. Thank you very much for your testimony and your appearance. The second panel will include Mr. Gene Upshaw, the Executive Director of the National Football League Players Association, Mr. Roger Goodell, the Commissioner of the National Football League, Mr. Mike Ditka, a member of the National Football League Hall of Fame, former NFL player and coach. Mr. Gale Sayers, the member of the NFL Hall of Fame, former NFL player for the Chicago Bears. We would ask that those witnesses come forward and take their place at the witness table.
I don't think you even knew about it. I did.
No. I'll get rid of this.
I don't know who's up here.
Let me thank the second panel for coming, and I apologize that you have had to wait, but I think it is probably valuable to have heard the first panel. I know many of you have traveled long distances to be here as well, and we appreciate that. We will hear first from Mr. Gene Upshaw, Executive Director of the National Football League Players Association. Mr. Upshaw, you may proceed.
I wanted to.
What would you like?
I had some charts that I have to get out.
Oh.
I'm just waiting for a chart that has to get up, but I'll start anyway.
All right.
I first want to thank the chairman and the panel for inviting us here and to be part of this. Before I get started, I'd like to introduce a few players that came along to hear the testimony. Troy Vincent, who is the president of the NFL Players Association, Eddie Mason, Ryan Keel, Brian Mitchell, and Brig Owens. They're all here because they're very interested in this issue, as all active and retired players are. I would first like to say that I am Gene Upshaw. I am the Executive Director of the NFL Players Association, and I appear before this committee at your invitation to discuss benefits provided for NFL players in the National Football League. Prior to becoming Executive Director, I played 16 years in the National Football League, and I understand the rewards and the risks of playing this game. I'm also distressed when I hear about former players who are hurting and are in need. Remember, I played with a lot of these guys, I know a lot of these guys, and I played against a lot of these guys. So I've spent my entire professional life fighting for the rights of players, both active and retired. I also recognize that these are emotional issues, that we play an emotional game, and this game brings out some emotions that it takes to play it, and it just follows you the rest of your life. I'll ask permission from the chairman to submit our white paper as part of the record, also my written testimony and my summary as part of the record. Thank you. Our benefits in the National Football League were forged in collective bargaining. In 1993, as part of my first collective bargaining agreement as executive director, we dramatically improved both pension and disability for all players. I just want to make three simple points in my presentation. First, the NFLPA is proud of the job that we have done for NFL players, both active and retired. Players are well compensated and enjoy an outstanding benefit package. Unlike many businesses where benefits have been reduced, benefits for NFL players have been maintained and repeatedly improved. We represent the best practices of labor relations. Second, we're not finished. I think the active players respect and emphasize with the emotions and concerns expressed by retired players. That is why we established in 1984 a retired players division at the NFL Players Association's office. And in 1990,
we established the Players Assistance Trust, which is funded by the active players to help former players in need. In the past 18 months, this fund has distributed over $1.5 million to former players in need and need financial assistance. When I became executive director in 1983, about 30% of the NFL revenues went to the players. That has now doubled to 60%, and all of the revenues. Our union had to go through some dark times to achieve this. We had to renounce our status as a union. We had to decertify. And we had to bring a legal challenge that ultimately led to our present success. I don't think any union has ever done that, and many thought we were crazy, but we made it work. We shifted the battle from the picket line to the courtroom and forged a partnership with the owners we are proud of today. With labor peace, the game has grown and it benefited both the players, the owners, and the fans. This success has allowed us to win against prevailing trends of reducing workers' benefits. I have some charts that I brought with me to sort of illustrate the point that we have. Chart 1, just to my right and your left, shows that in 1993, we reached back for the first time to include all players that had no pension, the pre-59ers, and brought them into the pension plan in 1993. This meant that we brought in an additional 900 players and their beneficiaries. Each succeeding extension, 1998, 2002, and 2006, we have improved the pension benefit credits for all former players, and they've been increased. Let's turn to disability. I want to begin by emphasizing that the Players Association, the members, the staff, and me personally are sensitive to the medical, financial, and emotional needs of professional players, both active and retired. We're distressed when we hear about a player in need, and we're committed to responding to the needs of all players. But we reject the charges that the present disability system treats veteran players harshly and denies them access to the benefits. The factual record disproved those charges. Of course, the system can be improved, and Commissioner Goodell and I are determined to simplify, expedite the process of these claims. Chart 2. It summarized the disability decisions from 1993 when the present categories were put in place and established. We've had 1,052 applicants. We have 48 cases that are pending. We've approved 428 cases, and we have 576 that were denied. Of the cases that are denied, there are several reasons why they were denied. Some were already drawing pension, some didn't have enough vested years. Just recently, we just added a new disability that's been mentioned earlier in earlier testimony, Plan 88. Plan 88 was established in honor of John Mackey, the great tight end, Hall of Famer, who wore number 88 and is suffering from this terrible, terrible disease. It was negotiated between Paul Tagliabue and myself in the 2006 CBA extension. This benefit was extremely important to all of us connected to the National Football League. John was the first president of the Combined Union in 1970, and we all have tried to remain as close to John as we possibly can as he deals with this terrible, terrible disease. Chart 3 shows as of February, when we instituted this plan, that 130 applicants were mailed out to players. We received 79 back, and of that 79, 60 have been approved, 4 have been denied, and 15 are pending. Commissioner Goodell and I do not decide disability claims. You've heard a lot about the disability board that sits and the retirement board that sits on behalf of the NFL players and the NFL owners. These claims must first go through a two-person disability committee. Then it must, if a player is not happy, if a player is not happy and there's a deadlock, he can then appeal it to the full board, where there are three members, former players: Tom Condon, who is a president of the NFLPA, former president; Jeff Van Note, another former president of the NFLPA, played 18 years for the Falcons; and Dave Dorson, who testified early. The NFL appoints team owners and have appointed team owners: Bill Bidwell of Arizona, Clark Hunt of Kansas City, and Dick Cass, who is the president of the Baltimore Ravens. If a player is dissatisfied with this board, they have a right, which you heard from Brent Boyd, to appeal to the federal courts. And we have had several appeals to the federal courts. Most recently, the NFL and the NFLPA formed an alliance bringing together over $7 million initially to fund joint replacements and to address financial needs and hardships of retired players. The joint replacement surgery will be available at no cost to players, without insurance, and at designated hospitals across the country. All of these benefits are paid for by the active players. Chart 4 shows that the current players give up what the current players give up to fund these benefits. Our CBA allocates a fixed percentage for salaries and benefits. This past year, the active players voluntarily gave up $147.5 million to fund the benefits for the retired players. That's $96.5 million to fund pensions, $20 million to fund disability benefits, $31 million to fund medical benefits, just for the former players. And these numbers are growing. We've had 124% increase from 2005 to 2006 in just pension increase alone. The process has cost active players $82,000 per player to fund these benefits, which brings me to my third point. I have three suggestions for congressional consideration to help us in this. First, we need standards for workers' compensation. The current state-by-state system causes a vast majority of hurt workers, not just NFL players, to settle for a lump sum payment and give up their rights to lifetime medical for their injuries on the job. Congress could impose federal standards to allow workers to get immediate medical care but still maintain lifetime coverage. Second, the federal law does not allow a union to manage the plans alone. It's negotiated with the employees, and they give a fixed amount. And since we are getting blamed for not granting disabilities, we believe that we should have the only voice when it comes to a granting of disabilities. We're not saying that the 6 trustees have done anything wrong, or we're not criticizing the trustees for the job that they've done. And third, the Department of Labor in 2006 imposed a standard and a different layer on disability decisions. It's an initial claims committee. We think that Congress can eliminate this requirement, which is another bottleneck that will help speed up the process. I'm at the end. So after 16 years as an NFL player and another 24 as executive director, be assured that no one cares more for the players in the National Football League, both past and present, than I do. And I've spent an awful lot of my lifetime fighting those battles to protect those rights and to give us what we have today. But our job is not over.
Mr. Upshaw, thank you very much for being here and for your testimony. Commissioner Goodell, welcome. You may proceed.
Chairman Dorman, thank you. I know members of the committee, I know that we're pressed for time, so I'll move as quickly as I can. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to appear today and testify on this very important subject. We in the NFL strive to do everything in a responsible and comprehensive fashion, and we can only benefit from objective, thoughtful reviews of our policies and our programs. I'm joined here today by Harold Henderson and Dennis Curran, both who have been deeply involved in the development and administration of player benefit programs for the past 2 decades. If you have any questions regarding individual cases, I'm certain that they or one of Mr. Upshaw's colleagues could respond better than I can today. I'm also joined by Jim Irsay, the owner of the defending Super Bowl champion Indianapolis Colts, who, like all NFL owners, has a keen interest in the welfare of our NFL alumni and has grown up in the NFL just like I. I recently completed my first year as commissioner. I spent considerable amount of time with retired players and listening to their views. And while I would candidly acknowledge that we would have more work to do, I want to outline both the steps taken thus far and the framework within which we are approaching this issue going forward. I begin from a premise which I think no one seriously disputes. The men who played professional football decades ago deserve our respect and recognition, and their contributions to our game must never be overlooked. I honor them, and neither I nor the NFL clubs will turn our backs on them. And this is not Gene Upshaw's problem alone, nor is it the NFL's. The responsibility for helping retired players belongs to all of us, NFL owners, the union, current and retired players, and me as commissioner. I must be compassionate, creative, and responsible. We are proud of the fact that player benefits steadily improved over time. While many businesses have terminated their pension plans or turned them over to the Federal Pension Guarantee Board, we have both negotiated steady increases in our benefits and agreed to apply those increases on a retroactive basis. In the last 10 years, owners have increased their obligations by roughly $400 million, virtually all of which has been for the benefit of retired players. Our disability plan offers a range of benefits including active football, inactive, and football degenerative, total and permanent disability benefits, and line of duty partial disability benefits. We recently added another benefit, which Gene spoke about, known as the 88 plan, which provides up to $88,000 per year for former players suffering from dementia, without requiring proof that the dementia is football-related. Benefits available under our disability plan have also grown substantially over the past 15 years. The football-related total and permanent disability benefit is now $224,000 per year. An active player whose total and permanent disability is not related to football, but rather to an automobile accident or some other off-the-field incident, receives $134,000 per year. Former players with football-related degenerative disabilities receive $110,000 per year. These payments continue as long as he remains disabled. Players with at least 3 years of experience are eligible for benefits even if the disability is not football-related. Eligible players can still apply for football degenerative benefits for up to 15 years after they retire from the NFL. The NFL plan provides for payment of disability benefits on a retroactive basis, so players are not prejudiced if there are delays in the application and administration process. And NFL disability benefits are not offset by medical or workers' compensation payments. We believe these features, far from being exclusionary, demonstrate our commitment to providing fair and generous benefits to players and their families. And the record bears them out. Since 2000, we have paid more than $110 million to players from the 1960s to the present who qualified for disability benefits. Like you, I have heard concerns expressed about red tape and the complexity of the application process. We have taken recent steps to address that problem, and I think there is more we can do. We have tried to ensure that the standards by which disability claims are evaluated are clear and understandable, and therefore more easily and evenly applied. Decisions regarding line of duty disability are based on standards developed by the American Medical Association. We also recently agreed to expand the standards for determining total and permanent disability. If a player has been determined to be eligible for disability benefits by Social Security, that will also apply for NFL disability payments. Our retirees have my personal commitment to continue the effort to identify and implement any reasonable procedural changes that would allow disability determinations to be made more quickly and reliably, and Jean and I have agreed to work hard on this issue. This does not mean that every person who seeks disability benefits will or should receive them. And it does not mean that even if approved, every applicant will receive the amount he requests. But we will continue to strive to help those who need benefits or other support. Apart from addressing the workings of the disability plan, we have recently taken some additional steps to address specific needs of former players. Earlier this year, we joined the NFL Players Association, the NFL Alumni Association, and the Pro Football Hall of Fame to establish an alliance to bring together different groups seeking to help retired players in need. As a first step, we agreed to create a fund set initially at $7 million to fund two specific medical initiatives. First, to provide full or partial funding of hip and knee or shoulder replacement surgery and related rehabilitation for former players at a network of leading hospitals throughout the country that can guarantee quality care. Second, to provide an expanded national program of cardiovascular risk screening and education for former players. Apart from these two programs, we are also exploring ways of providing support for older players in need of assisted living arrangements and other specific medical needs. Finally, we are expanding our outreach efforts to better identify former players with special needs so that our alliance can provide financial assistance to those proud former players and their families who are sometimes hesitant to ask for assistance. As needed, our alliance will provide additional funding for these initiatives. Some of the leaders addressing this issue, former players like Jerry Kramer or Hall of Famers Coach Ditka, Willie Lanier, Merlin Olsen, have met with us and continue to do so. Today, there are approximately 4,900 NFL retired players eligible to receive disability benefits. Like many groups of that size, the circumstances vary widely. Fortunately, the vast majority remain active and productive and do not need to be involved in the disability system. But we remain proud of the comprehensive and improving package of benefits provided to players, and we will continue working to do as much as possible to help those in need. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before your committee today.
Commissioner Goodell, thank you very much for being here and for your statement. Mr. Mike Ditka from player, coach, Chicago Bears. Mr. Ditka.
Whatever. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate you being here, but I'm not sure I really understand it. The Congress of the United States of this great country has a lot more important things to do than this. And it's a shame that it's come to this, but it has come to this. I want to clarify one thing. We've had one of my former players take some pretty good pot shots, and that seems to be his nature. I'm not mad at anybody, especially this man or that man. The system's broken. Fix it. Football, and listen to me, football owes me nothing, not a thing, but I owe everything I have in life to this great game, from high school to college to professional. I've been able to participate as a player, an assistant coach, a head coach for almost 50 years in this league, and now I'm an expert. I get to talk about it. That's pretty interesting. The system is broke. Fix it. They know what's broke. They know how to fix it. We're not talking about the money. Everybody knows the money's there. Fix the system. Don't make proud men beg. Don't make them jump through hoops. They have dignity. Let people live out their lives with some respect. That's all I'm asking. I'm not asking for an increase in my pension, as been mentioned. Nobody cares about that stuff. And it was showing up what I get in my pension. I also waited to age 65 to get it. I'm entitled to that. I played in this game. But the guys who made these players today, they say, well, they're making all these contributions to the former players. They should. The former players are the reason this league is what it is. Not the total reason. They're not the whole of it. They're part of it. The players today are only the keepers of a great game. The makers of a great game came a long time ago and will continue to come long after these guys are gone. Just let them live out their life with a little bit of respect. We started a Hall of Fame Assistance Dire Need Fund about 8 years ago from a golf tournament I had. We've been giving money to former Hall of Famers, and actually former players who aren't Hall of Famers. And we've been helping them out. It's a little here. It's 10,000, it's 5,000, it's 20,000. It's no big deal, but it helps out. They need the help. And they don't even know where to go to get other help. Now maybe this is being made more aware of the situation and how to get help. And all we're saying is, hey, nobody's mad at anybody. I'm grateful. I just think this shouldn't be happening. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. You people have more important things to do than what we're doing. And I hope it doesn't come down to any decisions you have to make. I want you to hear the story. The league, this man is a good man. He's got a good heart. Gene Upshaw, I'm sure, is a good man with a good heart. Do the right thing. Fix the system. Quit arguing about it. Everybody will go away, and especially me. Because I didn't chose this. It chose me, believe me. This is not what I'm looking to be doing, believe me. So I just want to tell you, I have no charts to show you. You'll be grateful for that. Thank you for your time, and I do apologize. I mean it.
Mr. Ditka, thank you very much. The baseball folks said no one has any business holding hearings on steroids either.
Yeah.
But the fact is, because there were hearings on steroids, the changes were made in baseball in a very significant and a very positive way. Perhaps public pressure is important when you're talking about people's lives, people who can't get up and walk in the morning and so on. So I understand. My preference is that, although there's an antitrust exemption and various things, my preference is that the Congress do nothing more than holding hearings and applying some pressure, and perhaps through that approach we'll get to the right result. Mr. Gale Sayers, Chicago Bears Hall of Fame.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, distinguished guests. My name is Gale Sayers. I was a running back for the Chicago Bears from 1965 to 1971, when my career ended as a result of a knee injury. I have since had rewarding careers in athletic administration and sports marketing. I started a computer business in 1983, which has grown into a major provider of technology products and services. In short, I'm a man truly blessed by God and life, like my friends Mike Ditka and Gene Upshaw. I'm not a typical NFL retiree who has suffered through the disabled process we discussed today. As a board member of a charity that helps retired players, however, I've seen many horror stories. I am here for those who are not as lucky as I was. I am also here as a member of the NFL family who is worried about the effects of our broken disability system is having on the entire game. At its best, football is a family, but extreme success has strained its relationships. Today, the NFL is a $7+ billion industry, yet it still struggles to do right by the retired players whose sacrifices built this game. I believe this failure is at the core of a general crisis in the game. You've been hearing about the symptoms almost every day. What family can remain healthy if its younger players are convinced that every dollar spent on the health of its elders is a dollar out of their pockets? Does that message promote the respect among generations that support rules of good conduct? Doesn't this attitude endorse the selfish behavior we observe in some young players? The current disability system routinely bars retired players from fair access to disability payments that offer a minimum standard of care. This is not the way a family works, and it's not the face the NFL should present to the world, to the other families that pay for the tickets, the TV subscriptions, the hot dogs and jerseys. I do not blame anyone for this failed system, but we will all share the blame if we don't pull together and fix it now while these players are still alive and in need. I've heard Gene speak about his efforts to obtain more benefits for retirees. I take him at his word, but whatever has been done to date has not been enough because the problem is still there. He, the NFLPA, and today's players must do more. I've also heard a statement attributed to Mr. Goodell that the owners see the 40-60 revenue split with the active players so generous that they cannot do more for retired players. I'm glad to hear him say that the owners take a stake in helping the retired players. This problem belongs to the entire NFL family, including the owners. As for the charitable efforts that retired players have engaged in for the disabled among us, they will continue. We will all know when we've done enough because the problem will simply not exist anymore. Until then, there's responsibility to take and work to do. Some legislation action might help this situation, but today I want to make a more immediate appeal to the committee. Please help us try to fix this problem. You call this an oversight hearing, and I think that's just what we need. At its best, football is a family with no need for an overseer where bargaining power is not an issue. But in this new, rich NFL, bargaining power is crucial, and the retired players have none without your help. I don't ask you to play for our side, only keep the game fair and keep it going until the job is done. I ask this committee to take oversight over a bargaining process among all the parties represented at this table by asking for periodic reports to the committee on our progress, perhaps every 30 days or so. If you do this, I think we can get the job done. For my part, if you would be the referees, I promise to give you my best game. Thank you for your consideration and for your oversight on this very important subject.
Mr. Sayers, thank you very much. I wish all of you could have heard testimony previously before this committee at other times and other occasions when pediatricians would come forward and tell us that these young kids taking a look at baseball and football players, idolizing these players, are finding ways and searching for ways to become a 300-pound lineman while in high school. So when people say to me, or the issue of steroids in baseball, when people say to me, well, Congress has no business in any of these areas, my preference is that that be the case. But if Congress can play a role in my judgment for applying some pressure and shining some light on what's wrong and how to fix it, perhaps Congress will do something very important, not just for players and former players, perhaps for young kids who are going to come through this system to be the future of baseball and football and other professional sports. So let me make a comment. I'm not, as a result of oversight hearing, particularly anxious or interested in legislating. It seems to me that professional football players and owners control a big pot of money, very substantial pot of money. The profits and salaries and ticket prices are very substantial, frankly, and it seems to me that they ought to find a way. When I say they, I'm talking about owners and players and all those involved in this professional sport ought to find a way to use the substantial amount of money that exists in this industry to respond to these issues. Now, let me ask one opening question, then in deference to my colleagues, I want them to be able to ask questions before we have a time problem. The one question I would ask of Mr. Goodell and Mr. Upshaw is this. I come to this now knowing very little about it. I've done a lot of reading about it in preparation for this hearing. But if I were in your two seats and I heard the testimony in the first panel, I would say, got to be something wrong here. There's a former football player that goes to a third doctor after the first two have said, look, you've got a problem here, a very serious medical problem. And the third doctor doesn't look at the brain scan and says, no, you're okay. I would look at that and I would say, boy, there's something broken and we ought to fix it. Give me your assessment of what we hear today at this panel.
Well, Senator, let me respond to that first, and then Gene can respond. I agree with you, and Gene and I have talked about this, that there's got to be a better system. There's got to be a way to improve our system to be more responsive to players that have injuries. We have made some changes in the short term. I have changed out two of the trustees, not because they were fiduciary irresponsible, but because I felt it was time to get a fresh thinking. In addition, we have tried to address this issue on a more regular basis rather than quarterly meetings. We're meeting on a much more regular basis, and our staffs are working on this in between the quarterly meetings. In addition, we have looked to outside counsel, independent counsel, that are experts in this area. I am not, but what we could do to try to make the system more intelligent, more responsive, and fair. So I think we are looking at what to do. I would agree with you that when you hear these stories, it is difficult, and you want to be responsive.
And while you answer Mr. Upshaw and Mr. Goodell, you may want to comment. Charlotte Observer this weekend reported that there are only 4 retired players who have received total and permanent disability. That's just counterintuitive to everything you would expect would be the case with respect to professional football. Is that an accurate number? And if so, do you find it as counterintuitive as I do?
To receive active TNP, total and permanent, it would have to be like the player that just experienced that this past weekend in Buffalo, a player that is totally and permanent on the field. Applies for total and permanent within 6 months after the injury. They're all for, and there are other players that are receiving total and permanent that have become age 55 that are now getting a retirement benefit, not a total and permanent benefit. Our system provides that once a player becomes 55 years old, he then switches from disability to retirement, but he still continues to get the higher of the two benefits.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Senator Dorgan, and thank you. I was listening to Mr. Ditka and thinking back to those old days when my dad, as a reporter, was actually friends of these players, when Norm Van Brocken was in our living room getting into a fist fight with my father, and when the players used to practice on a field formerly owned by the Animal Rescue League.
This fight with Norm Van Brocken.
That's what I figured. But what I remember most is that it was a different time in the game, and there was less money, and now a lot of those players are old and they're injured. And I guess my question of you, Mr. Goodell, is just I've heard about the differences between the National Football League and the other leagues, and when considered as a percentage of league revenue, how does the amount that football spend on disability payments to retired players compared to the amount spent by other sports leagues?
It's a very good question. We have looked at that, and when we look at the entire retirement benefits versus baseball, we think they are comparable. We have more players in the NFL. We have less, obviously, in Major League Baseball. We have more revenues. We have a different cost structure. But we do look at that, and we want to make sure that we are treating our players in the same fashion or better, hopefully better than other leagues. When you look at an isolated cases with respect to potentially just a disability case or a pension case, there will be differences. But when you look at the entire scope of benefits for players, we think they're comparable.
But I'm curious about why just until recently you didn't accept the determination for Social Security purposes of disabled, that you didn't use that as your standard, and you said you recently agreed in your testimony today to accept as totally and permanently disabled any player determined to be disabled for purposes of Social Security. Why wasn't that done before, and what difference has that made now?
Well, I've only been in this position for 1 year, but it's something Gene and I talked about 6 months ago, and frankly agreed to 6 months ago. If a individual is already qualified under the Social Security standard, we should move the process forward quickly and allow them to qualify under our disability program, and we have done that.
Mr. Ditka, did you want to respond?
I only want to say one thing. You know, delivering mail, working as a mechanic, being a newscaster, football is completely different. I mean, I don't want to bring it up. You know, we have a 12-year window to file for disability. You know, the average career of a football player is less than 4 years or right under 5 years or something. You have to be 4 years to be vested. Okay, supposing a guy comes into 21, 22, he's out of 28, 29, nothing shows up before he's 41. Very normal. And then things start showing up. I'm not sure I understand it. You know, it's fine to sit here and say, oh, we have ERISA law, we have Social Security, we're tying it in. This is an exception. Football is an exception. It is not a contact sport. It's a collision sport. This young man the other day did nothing but make a tackle, and he almost lost his life. Those things happen. The first week of the NFL season this year, you got 5 guys, I think, that are out for the year. It's tough. You got 200, 300-pound bodies flying around at great speeds. It's different than delivering mail or working in a factory or building cars. You can't tie it into Social Security the way everybody wants to do. It's a different thing.
Thank you, Mr. Ditka. And I just want to end so I can let Senator McCaskill go by saying we talked a little bit about why should Congress be looking at this. And Mr. Sayers was talking about how football is a family. Well, it's a very public family. And I think the way that we treat people with disabilities, people are watching this. The way we treat people that have built basically an empire for others to profit from, people are watching this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let me, as I call on Senator McCaskill, say that when I mentioned the Charlotte Observer article the 4 retired players' total and permanent disability, that was for brain injuries caused by multiple concussions. So I want to make that point because there's been testimony today, and it relates to what Mr. Ditka suggested, that this may show up 10, 15, or 20 years later. Senator McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to mention today, he's not here, but I want to mention Fred Arbanis. Fred and I served together on the county legislature for a number of years. I've watched his body fall apart. I've watched him from going from a very proud man who's recognized everywhere in Kansas City for all the right reasons to basically not being able to do much before noon because it takes him that long to get his body moving. I want to ask a couple of questions. It's my understanding, Mr. Upshaw, that the money that is given over to the Pension and Disability Fund is in fact negotiated by the Players Association, and it is set aside at the negotiation, and it is in fact their money.
Yes.
Then why is it 3 and 3? Why do the owners have just as much say on how that money is being spent as the players? If that money's already been negotiated away from the owners and that belongs to the players, then why do they get to veto by a 3-3 vote a disability finding that the players decide is valid?
Because the plan operates under the Taft-Hartley laws, and the Taft-Hartley laws give both the players and the owners an equal vote.
Well, do you need us to amend the Taft-Hartley players to allow?
I suggested
Okay.
that as part of one of the solutions.
So it seems to me that it's almost like you negotiate to try to get this money, and this comes off the top, I understand.
Yes.
This isn't a line item on people's paycheck.
No.
This is off the top. And if that's the case and you work hard to negotiate, it seems to me you ought to be here asking and demanding this hearing and asking for this legislation on behalf of the Players Association, that the players have the ability to decide what former players are entitled to disability under what circumstances.
Well, that's why we end up with a 3-3 vote. We do have unanimous votes from time to time, but there's no dispute over the facts in a unanimous vote, either for an approval or for a denial. But in a lot of cases, there are 3-3 votes, which is no reason whatsoever for a player, the former players, to vote against another player if he qualifies. There are a lot of players that file claims that do not qualify.
Let me ask, Mr. Goodell, would you have any problem with that if we amended the Taft-Hartley to allow under these circumstances, since the money has been negotiated away from the owners at the bargaining table? Would there be any problem with the people that have negotiated for that making the decision as to how the money was going to be spent?
Well, I'd make a couple of points, Senator. First off, and most importantly, anything that would improve the system that is responsible to do for the parties, we would consider, most importantly. Second of all, it somewhat implies that we have been a negative influence in this circumstance, and I don't believe we have. I think the facts don't support that.
Well, I think the 3-3 votes are tough. I think 3-3 votes are tough.
But the facts are that there haven't been that many 3-3 votes, and what happens is the process is set up through federal regulations and through the law that it would go on to see an independent doctor. And ultimately, it goes to an independent doctor who makes the final decision. And we've had some cases that have been taken and litigated. We've had 25. 24 have returned back in favor of the retirement board. Only one was reversed.
Well, believe me, I know what's involved in filing a federal lawsuit, and I don't think we want to make these guys have to go to federal court.
I agree with that. And
let me, because I don't have much time, I don't mean to cut you off, but the other area I really wanted to cover here was the LOD disability, the line of duty disability. I mean, you're going to have a whole lot of these players. They're going to have a line of duty disability, particularly if you talk about orthopedic needs. I mean, I got a new knee this year, and I got to tell you, I never played a day of football, and it hurts, and it's a pain, and I'm limping around here today, and I guarantee, and I was just a cheerleader in high school, for gosh sakes. Nobody was, no 300-pound linemen were flying at me. Well, no, but in all seriousness, the idea that an LOD disability has to be, you have to apply within 48 months. I mean, 4 years, if you've got a guy that's retiring at 27 or 28 because of a minor injury or for some other reason, or he just doesn't make it the next year, gets cut, I mean, you're asking that orthopedic serious surgery to show up within 4 years? I just think that is wildly unreasonable. And are you in favor of extending the LOD disability to a filing period that would be much longer than 4 years? Is that something that you all would object to, Mr. Upshaw?
No, we wouldn't object to it at all. Matter of fact, we've actually increased that. It used to be 36 months, and it's been increased to where it is today. But the line of duty disability is not the last place that you can go. We have players that come in on a line of duty and then move up the charts to degenerative, which will now let you into the door, which Mike talked about, is 15 years. So 15 years after you leave the game, you can still apply for that disability. Before 1993, we had none of these disabilities. All of these improvements we've made since 1993. So we're not opposed to that, but we also have another total and permanent disability that Brent Boyd is getting, that someone that doesn't qualify for anything in our plan can still get a disability even though it was not caused by football. So if you get hit by a bus and you come back and file for disability under this plan, you can receive it. That is what Brent Boyd is getting, because the doctor said, not Mr. L. Mr. L is not the doctor. He is the attorney that represents the plan, he's co-counsel to the plan. The doctor said Brent Boyd did not, and you couldn't connect one concussion in 1980 to his present condition today.
Total and permanent is different than partial. And you're going to have a lot more partials than you're going to have total and permanent. And 4 years is not enough. And I think as a show of good faith, you ought to get busy and get that fixed. What Mr. Ditka said is correct. This is common sense. Take care of these guys. They're taking care of us. They're taking care of the Players Association officers that are here. Their colleagues are going to be in the same position in 15 years as Conrad Dobler and Fred Arbanis and all the other great heroes that are here. And thank you all for being here, and I appreciate the answers to my questions.
Senator McCaskill, thank you very much. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't help but come to the table to note the difference between the NFL and Major League Baseball on the question of handling some of the former players. It was this senator that had to get right in the middle of it with regard to the compensation for the members of the old Negro leagues in Major League Baseball. And it has been slow going with Major League Baseball, and there has been a recognition of that. I'm grateful we don't have those issues before us here today, and I thank you for that. Now, the question that occurs to me is, why should there not be a medical doctor on either one of those boards?
Well, we don't have a medical doctor on the board, but we rely on the medical evidence that's presented by the player, both the board doctor and any evidence that the player might bring from his doctor.
Mr. Goodell?
I would respond to that, Senator, by saying that the board is not making a medical decision. They are taking the information from medical doctors who examine the players, who take all of their medical records, make an evaluation, and make a recommendation to the board. I'm not opposed to it. We would have to find a representative, but I believe that's the best explanation I can give you today.
Does anybody else want to comment on that?
Why not take it away from them completely? The owners and the Players Association. Take it totally away from them and create a board, completely independent, made up of medical people. And then if they turn it down, then there must be a reason to turn it down. But when these other people turn it down, people think there's an ulterior motive for turning it down. That's all I ask. Make it completely independent and see what happens.
Senator, if I might add then, if it moves down the process of being a 3-3 tie, it goes to an independent doctor and it's binding. Whatever that doctor's decision is, it is binding. So it is ultimately made by a doctor if there is a dispute amongst the retirement board.
Mr. Chairman, is that a vote? Well, then I'll just conclude by saying that, one of the thorniest problems that we have over and over is the question of disability for veterans. And they go through all of these disability claims procedures that are quite extensive. Maybe we ought to take a lesson from the experience that we try to determine the degree of disability with our veterans and have that be a lesson to apply here. Thank you.
Senator Nelson, thank you very much. A vote did start at 12 noon, and I would normally ask if we could stand in recess, but because there is a vote following this, it would require at least a half-an-hour recess. And what I think, I don't want to inconvenience you. All of you who've testified today have come here and provided, I think, some real assistance in giving us your perspective of what's happening. It seems to me there's something that's not connected here. I don't know what it is exactly, but something's not connected. Something is not working the way it should work. And as I indicated earlier, there's plenty of money around. I mean, I watch football from a living room, but I understand what ticket prices are. I understand what owners' profits are generally from what I read, and I understand how much some of these contracts for some players are. And so there's plenty of money around. It seems to me that sufficient money should be available to provide the kind of assistance that is necessary for those that help build this professional sport called football. It is, I think it is perhaps the most widely watched professional sport in our country, and my guess is most of those who would hear stories or read about them in the newspaper, as is frequently the case, or hear the testimony today, would be flabbergasted that there are people who spent their life in this professional sport and are now living in poverty, or now living in a circumstance where they can't find the kind of health care that they need or the kind of medical assistance they need. My hope, we will certainly evaluate the testimony and try to consider what kinds of things might be available. And I think, Mr. Commissioner and Mr. Upshaw, I hope we'll take a look. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send you 2 packets like this, individual letters from former players. I would think that in this business, in this industry, I know you will want to go through it and understand it and then evaluate what is it here that's wrong, how do we fix it. So I thank all of you very much for your willingness to come to this hearing. This hearing's adjourned. The various things together. So there is a reason for us to be interested and concerned, and that's the purpose of this hearing. Let me, before I begin, I want to mention that I'm going to call on Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who has asked to testify today, and we appreciate having her here. I'll take her testimony first. I don't expect we will ask questions, but we're happy to have her here, and then we will have 2 panels, and I will talk about the panels in a moment. But let me introduce Senator Hutchison for an opening comment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the opportunity to be at this hearing. I want to thank Chairman Inouye, as well as Vice Chairman Stevens, and of course, Mr. Chairman Dorgan. And I think you have laid it out very well. We know that there are players before the era of the mega salaries especially, who have had injuries that have manifested after the 5-year time period in which they have full coverage. And so we read about these things, and it does raise questions. And my hope is that with this hearing we will hear some of the issues on both sides. And then hopefully the NFL will be able to work it out with a good fair negotiation with the players and the former players, with everyone represented from their different perspectives, because I do think that perspectives are different depending on the era in which a player was able to play. And I also think that your reference to boxing is one that does provide somewhat of a model, because this is a high-risk sport. There's no question about it. And so we know that probably extra care on the medical side is something that is certainly warranted. However, I do hope that this can be settled in an amicable way and a responsible way by all the parties, and as we gather information, maybe that will be helpful, and as we monitor those negotiations. Let me just say on a personal note that one of my constituents is here, Daryl Johnston. I have known Daryl from a personal level because our children go to the same school. And so I have watched he and his wonderful wife, who are so active in the school and give back so much. So I've known him personally, but I know he also had to retire after 10 years with the Dallas Cowboys because of neck injuries, and has had a view on this that I think is worthy for us to hear. He is a person, Daryl Moose Johnston, who played for Syracuse. He was an All-American there, then earned his bachelor's degree in economics, and is a Fox Sports NFL broadcaster now, and has a great career. And I really am very pleased that he could become a part of the panel, and I thank the chairman for allowing that to happen. With that, I will listen to the testimony. I do have to leave a little earlier than the end of the hearing, so I will say that ahead of time, but look forward to having all of the testimony in writing. Thank you.
Senator, thank you very much. First, we will hear from Congressman Waters. Thank you very much for being with us. You may proceed.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Is the microphone turned on?
Can you hear me now? Yes? Good morning. I'd like to thank you, Chairman Dorgan, for holding this hearing, and I'd like to thank you, Senator Hutchinson, for being here this morning. And I'd like to thank all of the witnesses who have come today to help shed some light on many of the concerns that have been identified by former players. The National Football League's current system of compensation for its disabled retirees is an issue that has been widely discussed in Congress and the media. This issue also has great personal significance for me. My husband, Sidney Williams, played football in the NFL for 5 years. The NFL, we believe, has failed to fairly compensate its retired players for injuries suffered while playing a game that is one of the hallmarks of our American sporting tradition. These players chose professional football as a career, dedicated themselves to training and practice, and worked and played hard in a highly competitive contact sport. These players have given much to the NFL, and indeed have given their blood, sweat, and tears to the game of football. In return, the NFL owes much to its retired players that were injured as a result
To order. This is a hearing of the Senate Commerce Committee, a full committee hearing. I am chairman of the subcommittee dealing with interstate commerce, trade, tourism, and sports. We will be joined by other colleagues, but I want to start on time because we have a series of votes that begin shortly after 12 o'clock today. and I do want to begin on time. I should say at the start that I'm a football fan. I watched Monday Night Football last evening. Football is a unbelievably popular sport, very interesting and wonderful sport in many ways. It is also big business. I call it sport. It is also big business with mostly wealthy owners and players that are paid a great deal of money. There are, I believe, 32 teams. They are able to work with and speak with each other because of an antitrust exemption. Those 32 teams, of course, do not include teams from North Dakota or Wyoming or states similar to that. We reserve these national pastimes for the large population centers, and many states do not participate personally in them by having professional sports teams, and that's certainly the case with my state. It is a sport, the sport of football, that causes and can cause substantial physical injury to many athletes. We have about 8,000 former players of this sport. There is and has been a controversy about disability issues, how former players have been treated. The retirees believe, that is, those who have formerly played this professional sport, believe that about 3 or 4% of the living retirees qualify for some type of disability benefit. The National Football League owners and the Players Association say that is much higher than the 3 or 4%. It seems to me that the Players Association represents active players and the Commissioner represents the owners. We have many who will testify here today who are former players in this sport, and I don't quite know who represents them, if anyone. In many cases, they are great athletes who ended their careers with real damage to their bodies. Some live in pain, and the question is, what happens to them? Who represents them? What role do they have with respect to this growing industry and the resources that this growing industry provides? It's a very large and a very profitable industry, and it seems to me an industry that ought to be able to take care of the needs of those who help build this wonderful sport. When we called this hearing, I did not know what to expect in terms of communications. I must tell you, I have received, as chairman of the subcommittee, and I'm chairing the full committee at the request of Senator Inouye, I must tell you I've received a lot of mail, a lot of letters from former football players, and was surprised by that and surprised by the message. I've had a chance to meet with people who feel strongly on both sides of the issue of the controversy over disability payments, and it seems to me a worthwhile subject for us to discuss. What has happened, how it has happened, what might be considered, and some would say, well, why is it any business of the United States Congress? Obviously, we have in the jurisdiction of this committee sports. I've been involved in sports issues with Senator McCain and others dealing with the subject of boxing. Boxing is a sport in which too many young boxers are used up by promoters and discarded and end up with nothing, and so we've attempted to create a National Boxing Commission. And with respect to football, there is an antitrust exemption that allows the teams to work together and to negotiate.
Of competing in the game that Americans cherish. My purpose here today is to talk about a very specific case that I worked on for almost a year for a gentleman by the name of Jim Shorter. Mr. Shorter was a friend of my husband's and a former NFL player. Mr. Shorter died a horrible death, a death caused by years of neglect of football-related injuries. These injuries were compounded by the onset of adult diabetes and a lack of health care. When he died, Mr. Shorter had undergone several amputations, was blind, had had a heart attack, and was on dialysis. Furthermore, Jim Shorter died a broke man, stripped of his dignity and his silver years by an unfair and unyielding NFL disabilities program. This program, which is built like the rest of the functions of the NFL from the blood, sweat, and tears of men like Jim Shorter, was designed, in my belief, to refuse benefits for the very players that needed them most. At issue today are three components of the NFL benefit plan: pensions, disability benefits, and medical insurance. None of these adequately compensate the NFL's disabled players. Despite their hard work, injuries, and playing through those injuries, the average payout to retired professional football players is less than $2,000 a month. This is striking given that the poverty level in the United States is approximately $1,800 a month. Many retired football players receiving pensions have serious physical problems stemming from their playing days. Some have trouble walking, others have trouble sleeping, some have undergone multiple surgeries. In a few cases, former players have even committed suicide. One thing is clear, nearly all need more money than is provided by their pensions. Employer compensation to the NFL's pension plan paled in comparison to Major League Baseball. Total pension contributions left an average payout of $13,000 per football player and $36,700 per baseball player. To make the picture even clearer concerning the disproportionate pension system between football and baseball players, if former Washington cornerback Darrell Green, who played 20 years, decides to collect at age 55, he would get the largest pension in NFL history, $69,660 per year. A baseball player with a similar career, Cal Ripken Jr., stands to collect at 62 about $160,000. These numbers are astounding, given that football grosses considerably more revenue and income than baseball. The MLB's gross income is approximately $4.3 billion, while the NFL's gross is over $7.1 billion. Baseball continues to prosper on less income and higher expenses. There's no excuse for the NFL retirement benefits plan not to at least match the MLB's benefit plan. The risk of long-term injuries to which NFL players are exposed are legend. For example, there are growing concerns regarding the frequency of concussions among NFL players. In an aggressive contact sport, there are likely thousands of cases of concussions, many of which may result in subsequent disabilities. These retirees do not receive disability payments because they do not realize their impairments were caused by head injuries incurred years earlier. They are oftentimes too embarrassed to come forward, and the benefit system has been at least slow to recognize this phenomenon. Former safety Andre Waters, a 12-year veteran, recently committed suicide at 44. A study of Waters' brain tissue revealed a succession of football-related concussions that left Waters with the brain tissue of an 85-year-old man. The physical nature of the NFL often leaves veterans unable to lead normal lives, and many rely on their pensions to survive. Reform of the disability benefit system is necessary to allow retirees to receive the compensation that they deserve and need for their disability. Under the NFL's current medical insurance plan, the league provides insurance to vested players for 5 years after retirement. However, the 5-year period fails to account for the many injuries that will not manifest serious health effects until the end of this period. Because football is an intense contact sport, football players face long-term physical ailments that other athletes are lucky enough to avoid. A 2003 University of North Carolina study found that 263 of the 2,500 retired NFL players said concussions may have had a permanent effect on their ability to think and remember as they got older. In 2005, just before the Super Bowl, the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review produced an investigation on the number of injuries professional players suffer on the job. The investigation found that in the 2000 through 2003 seasons, NFL players racked up 6,558 injuries. More than half the athletes were hurt annually.
And I don't think that the NFL Retirement Board understands that they're not only impacting the player, but the families of these players. Divorce is high. People are fighting for the custody of their children. I was very fortunate to play at a time when the NFL Players Association regained some of their bargaining power and used that in the 1993 collective bargaining agreement to implement some plans for current players, such as a severance package, a 401k, a second career savings plan, and 5 years in a COBRA health plan. But none of these programs benefit players before 1993. Players such as Mike Mosley, who played from 82 to 84, who received full disability for 6 years until a doctor hired by the NFL ruled sedentary work was possible, and without warning withdrew his payments in 2004. Mike now lives at home with his 75-year-old mother, his 14-year-old daughter, and they're asked to survive on his mother's $306 per month Social Security check. I also played in an era when player safety was emphasized. The artificial surfaces that we played on were much safer than those played on the generation previous to me. gentlemen such as Conrad Dobler, who spent his entire 10-year career playing on an experimental surface known as AstroTurf that has a direct link to the multiple knee and hip replacements he's had, a span of 1 year in which 7 surgeries were performed, and nearly 100 days in the hospital last year. He's been denied disability 12 times, even though he has been deemed to be 90% disabled. During my career, there was also raised awareness about the concussion issue that was going around the NFL. Stricter protocols were put into place about a player returning to the field of play, and actually a whistleblower policy was implemented to make sure that these protocols were upheld within organizations. This type of policy would have benefited Garrett Webster's father, Mike Webster, who, if not the best, one of the best centers to ever play in the NFL, upon retirement was impacted by dementia, was homeless, living out of his car, and never received a dime of disability from the NFL plan upon his death in 2002. The NFL Players Association is trying to make amends. In the most recent CBA, they did create a program, and they are implementing the 88 plan, named for Baltimore Colts tight end John Mackey. The 88 plan provides $88,000 a year for residential care facility or $54,000 a year for home care for players suffering from dementia, early onset Alzheimer's, as John Mackey himself is. However, this is administered as a reimbursement plan. Kay Morris, who is the wife of Bears linebacker Larry Morris, who played in the late 50s and early 60s, has yet to receive a disability payment off of the 88 plan, although she's already incurred $200,000 in medical expenses. The reason that we have the retirees in the situation that they're in right now is we have no voice and we have no bargaining power. And I would like to ask the Senate Oversight Committee to help us find our voice, to help us increase our bargaining power, so that we, the retirees, can do the same thing that the NFLPA did in the 1993 collective bargaining agreement for the current players. I also would like to request that this committee call on the General Accountability Office to conduct a study so all the data can be known by all the members that will be involved in negotiations as we move forward. The NFL, as has been mentioned, is a $7 billion a year industry. There is too much money here for this problem to exist. With the help of all the parties involved, Gene Upshaw, Roger Goodell, who will testify later, Dave Duerson, who sits to my left, the retired players who are in this room, we can fix this problem. The money is there to fix this problem. And there's no reason for our players to be in the situations that they're in. And with your help, I hope that we can take the first steps in creating a disability program that gives NFL retirees a voice and ensures that the players who founded this league are no longer forgotten. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Johnson, thank you very much. Next we'll hear from Mr. Dave Duerson, the player trustee for the NFL Player Retirement Plan and former NFL player for the Chicago Bears. Mr. Duerson.
Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been quite some time since I walked these halls, back as a summer intern in '82 for Senator Dick Lugar, so please say hello for me to him. But to you, Chairman, and the members of the committee, I'm David R. Duerson, an 11-year retired NFL veteran. It is my privilege to serve as a trustee of the collectively bargained plans covering NFL players. I was born in Muncie, Indiana in 1960 to Julia and Arthur Duerson, Jr. My parents were married for 59 years until my mother's death of almost 4 years. My father is my hero. He has 2 Bronze Stars from World War II, having fought in the European theater, yet the medal he is most proud of is his Medal of Conduct. He also believes that every male child should serve 2 years in the armed services. My dad spent 38 years with General Motors and was an active member in the UAW. I stood alongside of him as a very small child on many picket lines, and I can still remember the day in 1974 that we became a 2-car and then a 3-car family. I asked my dad,
with the numbers spiking at 68% in 2003 and 4. During typical 4-year careers, one of every 10 NFL receivers experiences a concussion. On average, 7 professional football players a week face potentially life-altering head, spine, or neck trauma. The effect of these players' injuries do not become apparent until many years into the future. Long-term medical insurance is needed to treat the professional football players' injuries. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, this issue is a personal concern to me. My husband, Sidney Williams, was an NFL player in the 1960s. During his 6 professional years, He served as linebacker on one championship team. Football is one of America's greatest sports. Our NFL football players give their all on the field and play hard for the glory of the game. The NFL should not forget the contributions of its former players and should provide them with an adequate system to address their retirement and disability benefits. Mr. Chairman, I have here a folder about Mr. Jim Shorter's case. I worked on the case for almost a year. It started in January of 1999 when he informed me that he had been trying to get the attention of the association and they had not returned his calls. They had not responded. I started writing letters to them and I wrote to everybody, including Mr. Talladoo, Mr. Upshaw, and finally they advised us what we needed to do, getting the health records. Not only did I get Mr. Shorter all of the examinations that he needed, I went back into records years past to get physical examination records in order to help present his case. I wrote letters to every member of the board at that time. It was...
Congressman Waters, I'm going to have to ask you to summarize. We have 10 witnesses today.
Thank you. Well, we wrote letters to the board. We reviewed the Burt-Bell plan. We discovered that Mr. Shorter had received early retirement after he left football, having made very little money. Of course, he took early retirement because he had no funds. But at that time, the plan said if you take early retirement, no matter what your disabilities are, you can never receive disability benefits. And so these are the records, and the committee are welcome to them. Some perhaps we can share with you at a later date. But I wanted to share with you today my personal knowledge about the inadequacies of the plan, and I thank you very much.
Congressman Waters, we will include, if you will provide us with information, we will include relevant information in the permanent committee record. We appreciate very much your coming over from the U.S. House today to provide testimony.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We have two panels today, and I want to mention the first panel. Let me introduce members of the first panel. Darrell Johnson, who has been introduced by my colleague from Texas, Fox Sports announcer, former NFL player, Dallas Cowboys. Dave Dewerson, a player trustee for the NFL Player Retirement Plan and former NFL player for the Chicago Bears. Brent Boyd, former NFL player for the Minnesota Vikings. Bill Bain, former NFL player of the Los Angeles Rams, and Garrett Webster, the son of NFL player Mike Webster of the Pittsburgh Steelers. My understanding is that we have a number of other retirees in the room who've traveled to Washington for the hearing. I have the names of at least 4 of them. Let me mention them. If you are in the room, if you would just identify yourself. Conrad Dobler. Is Conrad Dobler here? Thank you. Dave Pear. Dwight Harrison. And Delvin Williams. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your attending the hearing. Let us begin with this panel, and let me call on you, Mr. Johnson, and let me say that the entire statement that you submit will be made a part of the permanent record. I would ask that each of you summarize your statements, if you would.
Thank you, Senator Dorgan. Welcome to all the distinguished guests. My name is Darrell Johnston. I played 11 years in the NFL for the Dallas Cowboys at the fullback position. My career was ended prematurely due to a neck injury I suffered in the opening game of the 1999 season. I know firsthand the frustration that many NFL players experience when going through the disability process. The initial doctor that filed my claim and the doctor who heard my appeal are designated as neutral physicians, but in reality are handpicked doctors by the NFL Players Association. The board that denied my claim is selected by NFL ownership and the NFL Players Association. Obviously, this is a system that is, by design, not interested in assisting a retired player. Going through this process, the frustration creates us to use such strong words as fraud, corruption, crony.